I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This line is often attributed to Voltaire. It turns out one of his followers apparently wrote it down, in fact. But to me, this epitomizes what the proper attitude is toward freedom of speech. The idea is that to live in a civilized society, we have to depend on voluntary persuasion, not forcibly shutting up our opponents. Is that the attitude that prevails today in Colorado? In some quarters, yes. But what is the prevailing attitude given the legal structure here in Colorado? It's this. If I disagree with what you say, I'm going to drag you into court, shackle you, tie up your resources, require you to spend days and days in court rather than spending your time advocating your beliefs and your ideas. That is the new standard of freedom of speech according to Colorado's campaign laws. So let's talk a bit about, Diana will talk more about the specifics of some of the laws and some of the rule changes that Secretary of State Scott Gessler's report is proposing. But I want to discuss the general way that these laws operate. The first thing you have to do under these campaign laws, if you wish to speak out for or against any ballot measure, and also candidates fall under the laws, spending more than $200 according to the constitutional language. The first thing you have to do is figure out what all the rules say. There's 3 levels of rules. There's the constitutional provisions, then there's all the statutes the legislature has passed surrounding the campaign laws and the Constitution. And then there are also the rules that the Secretary of State makes, which are mandated by the constitutional provisions. So you have 3 sets of rules. The last time I checked the Secretary of State's rule book, it was 100 pages long of dense legalese. In fact, the original amendment in the Constitution itself is longer than the entire original United States Constitution. This gives you an idea of its level of complexity. So, before you can practice free speech in Colorado, you have to learn 100 pages of dense legalese and try to figure out what these rules even mean. Now, that alone is a severe violation of your right of free speech. If you have to spend hours and hours and hours trying to learn these complex rules, that is limiting, restricting your ability to speak your mind freely. But then, what's the next step? That's not enough, obviously. After you read all these rules, then you have to register with the state. Now, that alone is a significant violation of your right of free speech. Can you imagine hopping in your time machine and going back to the founding era when they were debating the Constitution and saying to them, well look, before you debate the Constitution now on the table, you have to first register with the government. You would be very, very fortunate if you did not end up covered in tar and feathers. Right? So you have to register with the government before you can practice your right of free speech. That is not a right. That is now being transformed into a permission. Okay, so you go through that. You learn the rules, you register with the government. What's next? Then, as Diana will tell you, you have to undergo intense, very detailed reporting requirements. You have to track who gives you money, even trivial amounts of money. Their names, addresses. You have to submit it to the state, which is recorded for public record. You have to file your reports on time and in the way that the Secretary of State's office requires in accordance with the law. You have to set up different accounting and banking requirements. This alone is a significant undermining of your right of free speech. The common activist just doesn't have the time or energy to set up these kinds of paperwork issues in order to comply with the law. But then what happens after that, right? Okay, you've read all the rules, you've registered with the state, you've made all your reporting requirements, you've sent in all your information to the state. Now what? Now the real fun begins, because anyone who disagrees with you can sue you and take you into court. Maybe they think you spent more than $200 and you think you didn't. Maybe you got in-kind contributions for more than that, but it's disputable as to what the value of that was. It doesn't matter. You end up in court. Once you end up in court, you cannot win. You automatically lose. Even if you win the legal case, you have to tie up your resources, your time, your finances in order to fight these types of legal actions. And ironically, the groups that are going to be suing you in many cases have tons of money, and they're not subject to the exact same funding requirements that you are subject to as a political activist. It's really quite insane when you think about it. So that gives you a general idea of how the campaign finance laws work out in practice. But the left says, isn't big money going to corrupt the process? Don't we need to control big money in politics? Well, if they were really concerned about big money, why did they set the trigger for reporting at $200? In whose universe is $200 big money? I'm gonna somehow sway your mind with $200? I can't even do that with one person, much less the entire population of Colorado. Right? So it's absurd on its face when you look at the actual nature and character of the law. But I want to, of course, go to a deeper level here and point out that the right of free speech depends on the physical means to implement that speech, which entails our physical resources. You can't speak if you're forbidden from owning pen and paper, or if you're forbidden from using a computer or the internet. Right? If the government says you cannot own your computer, or you cannot own a video camera, even if the government isn't saying, well, you can't produce X, Y, or Z particular video, if Kelly can't own a video camera, the government is censoring her speech. And in a different way, when the government is restricting how you can spend your resources to promote your ideas, the government is restricting your ability to speak your mind, which is an indirect form of censorship. So, the idea that we can restrict your physical means of expressing yourself without violating your free speech is just absurd. If you're violating people's ability to use their resources to express their ideas, you are inherently automatically violating the right of free speech. The two go together. But if you look at the way that the laws are actually played out, right, it's immoral to restrict people's speech in this way. But it's also grotesquely impractical. If you look at the goals of the law, the stated goals, right, which is to keep people with big money from influencing politics, and the actual results. Who do these laws actually affect? If you have millions of dollars, what do you do in the face of these laws? You hire an army of attorneys. And you sue your opponents in court who don't have any resources. This is what you do. Who do these laws actually impact? Who do they actually prevent from speaking? Not the people with millions of dollars. It's the people like Matt, who has no resources or barely any resources. People like Diana, who has barely no resources. I have talked to 3 people, Matt included, who have been sued under these campaign laws. 2 of those 3 people are continuing to fight these actions in court more than a year after the last election. Colorado citizens with few to no resources are being dragged into court for daring to speak their minds, for daring to be active in the political process, for daring to stand up and fight for a better country. And I think this is shameful. I think it's shameful that Colorado citizens are being dragged into court for daring to exercise their right of free speech. Earlier this year, I was in a debate on television, John Caldera's show Devil's Advocate, and we were debating these laws. And a lady named Jenny Flanagan was on the show from Common Cause. And she said something to the effect that, well, look, this is all in Colorado's Constitution. This is what we have to live with. And I said, well, look, we also have the First Amendment. And you know what her reply was? Her reply was this: well, that's not part of the conversation right now. Not part of the conversation. The First Amendment is not part of the conversation when it comes to political speech. If you take the Bill of Rights seriously, the First Amendment is the conversation. It's the alpha and the omega of the conversation. And I think it's time to again make the First Amendment a part of the conversation here in Colorado. Thank you.